The smell of burnt wire and old food was strong in the cantina that night. Groth sat at the far corner table, the one with the cracked leg that nobody else wanted. His 4 arms rested on the table. 2 of them held a drink. The other 2 were still, which was unusual for him. Usually at least one was tapping something. The young recruits had found him by accident. Darvek, the tall gray-skinned one with nervous eyes, had asked an older soldier where to sit. The older soldier had pointed at Groth and walked away without saying anything else. Now Darvek sat across from the old veteran, and beside him sat Skiv, who was small and quick-eyed and had not stopped looking toward the corridor since they arrived. Down that corridor was the human barracks. The sounds coming from it were loud. Laughter mostly. Some kind of rhythmic noise that might have been music, or might have been arguing. Hard to tell with humans. Why are they doing that? Darvek asked. We deploy in the morning. Groth looked at him. He had a long scar that ran from the top of his jaw down to his collar. He had several others. He was the kind of creature who had collected damage the way some people collect small objects to put on shelves. Doing what? Groth said, laughing. Before a combat mission. Groth looked down at his drink. He was quiet long enough that Darvek thought maybe he had said something wrong. Then the old soldier spoke. I will tell you something I saw, he said. Then maybe you will understand. He took a slow drink and set the cup down. The Second Vrel campaign was not a famous war. It was not the kind of war that gets recorded in detail and taught to young soldiers as an example of strategy or courage. It was the kind of war that happens in bad terrain, with poor supply lines, against an enemy that had no interest in doing things cleanly. It was the kind of war where things went wrong every day and you simply kept moving. Groth was younger then, still fast, still believed, in a way he no longer did, that experience would protect him from surprise. There was a human soldier in his unit named Reyes. She was not particularly large, as humans go. She was quiet. She did her work, ate her food, and did not make a large impression on anyone in the first weeks. Groth barely remembered her name at the time. She was simply one of several humans attached to the unit as part of a joint operation arrangement. On the 41st day, the enemy pushed hard from the eastern ridge. They had been waiting, Groth understood later, for exactly the right moment. The left flank of the unit was the weak point. 3 soldiers had been pulled from it the previous night to reinforce the center. What remained on the left flank, when the push came, was Reyes and 2 others. One of the others was down in the first 6 minutes. The second pulled back on orders when the communication line broke. Reyes did not pull back. Nobody ordered her to stay. Nobody ordered her to go. Communication was broken in both directions. She simply made a decision. She stayed. Groth's side of the unit did not know the full picture until the 7th hour. By then they had managed to stabilize the center and send a runner toward the left. The runner came back with a report that was difficult to believe. The left flank was still holding. 1 soldier. Holding. They sent reinforcements. It took another 4 hours to get them through. When they reached Reyes, she had taken a plasma burn across the top of her left shoulder and 2 more down her back. She had a piece of shrapnel in her right leg, which had been bleeding for most of the 11 hours. She had wrapped it herself, at some point, with material torn from her own kit, without stopping firing. She was still conscious, still in position, still watching the ridge. The medic who got to her first told Groth later that Reyes had been humming something, quietly, to herself, some kind of low-repeated sound. The medic did not know what it was. She asked Reyes about it afterward. Reyes said she had not realized she was doing it. The medic asked what kept her at the position for all those hours, with those injuries, with no communication, no confirmation that anyone was coming. Reyes thought about it. She said, I figured if I left, the whole line could break. I didn't want to be the reason for that. The medic relayed this to Groth as if it explained everything. Groth had sat with it for a long time, because it was not a special reason. It was not heroism in the way stories usually described heroism, with speeches and grand moments. It was just a simple calculation that Reyes had made and then honored. She did not want to be the reason things got worse. So she stayed. Groth could not explain what made that possible. 11 hours. 3 burns. A leg full of shrapnel. Still humming. Still watching. No training manual he had ever read made a person capable of that. It was something else. Something that came from inside humans that Groth had no name for in his own language. He stopped talking. Darvek had not moved. Skiv was no longer looking at the corridor. They laughed before battles, Groth said. Because dying is not the thing they are most afraid of. They are afraid of letting down the people beside them. It is a different fear. He picked up his drink. It makes them very hard to stop. Skiv refilled his own cup without asking if anyone else wanted a refill. He was the kind of person who forgot to ask, not out of selfishness, but because his mind moved quickly and did not always wait for the rest of him. He sat back down and pulled his legs underneath the chair the way his kind did when they were settling in. I heard they are undisciplined, he said. Not as a challenge. More like he was checking to see if the statement would hold up. Groth did not answer right away. He turned his cup slowly on the table. One full rotation. Then he looked at Skiv. Who told you that? Skiv made a small gesture with two of his four thin fingers. A gesture that meant something like, everyone. Or, it is commonly said. Or, I do not remember, and it does not matter. Groth made a sound in his chest that was almost a laugh, but heavier. Then he began. The Drevian marshes do not appear in most military records as a place where anything significant happened. They are cold, flat, wet, and filled with a kind of plant life that smells like something that has been dead for a short time. Communication signals travel poorly through the marsh. Nothing about the terrain is convenient for defense or attack. It is simply bad ground. Groth's company was in the marshes for 11 days. They had gone in chasing a supply disruption, and the enemy had let them go in, then cut the line behind them. By the fourth day, they had no resupply, no reliable communication outward, and no clear count of how many enemy units were in the area. By the sixth day, they had found a low ridge to hold, built some cover, and were waiting. The human tactical officer with the unit was a man named Aldrich. He was thin and had an unhurried way of speaking, like someone who had decided long ago that raising his voice was a waste of effort. He looked at the situation on the sixth day, asked a series of quiet questions, and then gave a single order. Silence and stillness. 72 hours. No fires. No transmissions, even coded. No unnecessary movement. Any soldier who needed to communicate would do it by hand signal or not at all. The unit would disappear. Groth had served for a long time. He had followed difficult orders. But those 72 hours were among the hardest things he had done in his career. Every trained instinct said, move. Respond. Do something. The body wants to act. The mind invents reasons to act. Every small sound from the marsh became a reason. Every shift in light. Every imagined enemy position. He watched the humans during that time. They slept. Not all of them, and not carelessly. They set their own watch rotations without being told, handled it quietly, and the ones not on watch simply rested. Aldrich spent the long hours reading on a small device he kept in his front pocket. He read for hours at a time. He looked, Groth thought, like someone on a long journey who was simply passing the time until the next stop. Once, on the second day, one of the younger soldiers started to say something. One of the human veterans put a hand on his arm. The young soldier stopped. That was all. No reprimand. No explanation. The hand on the arm, and silence, and the young soldier understood. On the 73rd hour, Aldrich gave the second order. Groth had expected a fighting retreat. A charge. Something that matched the pressure that had built for 3 days. Instead, Aldrich sent a small team of 6, for humans, 2 volunteers from Groth's own people, to the enemy supply line 3 kilometers northeast. They had spent those 72 hours watching, counting patrol intervals, mapping the one gap in the coverage that existed for 11 minutes every 4 hours. They went through the gap. They destroyed the supply cache. They came back through the same gap before it closed. No alarm was raised. The enemy spent 4 more days searching the marsh before pulling back. They never found where the unit had been. They searched the wrong areas because the enemy's own supply problem had begun to eat their attention entirely. When communication came back, the unit's commanding officer sent a message asking for a status report. Aldrich sent back 3 words, situation resolved. Returning. Groth asked him later what had made him certain the waiting would work. Aldrich thought for a moment. He said the waiting was not the hard part. The hard part was making sure the right target became clear before acting. Acting before the right moment appeared was just movement, not progress. Then he went back to his reading. Groth let the story settle. Undisciplined, he said again, repeating Skiv's word back to him slowly. He shook his head once. In every unit I have served in, across 30 years, I have never had to tell a human to be patient twice. You show them why it matters. And then they become very, very still. He set his cup down. Most things that are alive cannot do that. Patience is uncomfortable. Humans decided it was a weapon, so they trained themselves to hold it like one. Skiv said nothing. Outside, in the corridor, the human barracks had gone quieter. One voice now. Low. Still talking. One of them still awake, for reasons of their own. The station's ventilation system made a low, cycling hum that Darvek had stopped noticing after the first hour. Now he noticed it again. The cantina had emptied out around them. A few other soldiers sat at distant tables, but they kept to themselves. The three of them, Groth and the two young recruits, had become their own small world at the cracked corner table. Skiv turned his cup in his hands. He had a question, but he was working up to it in the careful way of someone who is not sure whether the question is stupid or serious. The rumors say, he started, that humans go back for dead soldiers, even when it costs them. He said it the way a person states something they do not entirely believe, waiting to be corrected. Groth did not correct him. It is not a rumor, Groth said. He was quiet for a moment, not for effect, but because some things take a second to carry from memory to words. I was there for one, he said. The insertion over Mira 4 went wrong before anyone hit the ground. Orbital drops are precise work, and precision requires information. The information they had been given about the defense grid below was old. No one admitted this until later. The result was that 3 of the 7 drop units landed significantly off target, in territory that was not secured, against opposition that was very much prepared. By the time the surviving units reorganized, there were 11 dead. The bodies were spread across 3 different landing zones. 2 of the zones were still contested. Confederacy protocol in such situations was clear. It had been written carefully, tested across many conflicts, and agreed upon by member species through a long process of rational discussion. The living retreat. The dead are honored in absentia. A memorial is registered. The mission continues. Every unit followed this protocol. It was logical. It kept more soldiers alive. Everyone understood it. A human sergeant named Bora looked at the protocol and made a decision that had nothing to do with it. She asked for volunteers. She said what she was doing and why. She did not order anyone. She said she was going back, and anyone who wanted to come was welcome. 7 people stepped forward without hesitation, all of them human. They went back into the first contested zone and recovered 4 of the dead. Then they came back. Then 2 of them were treated for injuries. Then Bora went back again, into the second zone, with 4 volunteers, and recovered 3 more. They did this not over the course of a long, carefully planned operation. They did it that same afternoon, with the weapons and equipment they had on hand, moving on their own judgment. Groth watched some of it from the secured ridge. He did not have words for what he was watching at the time. He thought at first it was a tactical decision, that perhaps the humans believed recovering the bodies held some strategic value he was not aware of. He asked one of the human soldiers about it later, a quiet young man who had volunteered for the second run. The young soldier looked confused by the question. He said, "We couldn't leave them out there." Groth asked why not. He was not trying to be harsh. He genuinely wanted to understand. The soldier thought for a moment and said, "They were ours." That was the complete answer. There was no strategy in it. No calculation of value. The dead had belonged to them, and that meant they were brought home. It was not a policy. It was not something they had been ordered to feel. It was simply a fact that appeared to operate inside humans the way gravity operated in space, not as a choice, but as a condition of being what they were. The enemy, Groth learned later, had intended to use the bodies. It was a tactic they had used before. Recover the fallen of the other side. Use them as leverage in communications, create pressure. They had done it to other Confederacy species, and it had worked. It did not work here because Bora had already gone and taken that option off the table, at a cost of 2 wounded soldiers and an afternoon's worth of personal risk. When someone pointed this out to Bora, the tactical outcome, the way her decision had removed an enemy advantage, she said she had not thought about that at all. She had just gone because they needed to go. Groth let the story end there. Darvek had leaned forward at some point during the telling and had not leaned back. Skiv's cup was empty. Neither of them had reached to refill anything. Do they always do that? Darvek asked. Go back. When they can, Groth said. They do not always succeed. But they try. They will always try. He looked at both of them. When you fight beside humans, you will never be left out there. Not by them. He folded 2 of his hands on the table. Think about what that does to the soldier fighting next to them. Think about how hard you fight when you know the person beside you will not leave you. Think about how much you do not want to fail that person. Neither recruit said anything. That is the thing, Groth said. It is not just what humans do. It is what they make the people around them do. Darvek had been listening very carefully. He was the kind of person who did that, took things in and turned them over quietly before speaking. Skiv was the opposite, quick with reactions and opinions. But for the past hour, both of them had been unusually still. Groth found that he did not mind the company. Old soldiers rarely admitted to being lonely, but the quiet evenings before deployments were their own kind of hard. Darvek set down his cup and said, "Is it learned? Or is it something they are born with?" Groth understood the question. It was the right question to be asking. It was also one of the harder ones to answer. "Let me tell you about a man named Sol," Groth said. During the siege at the outpost they called Grey Point, everything that could go wrong with the equipment did, in the order most likely to cause the most damage. The power relay on the eastern defensive line failed first, then the backup communication array. Then the atmospheric processor in the south wing started cycling incorrectly, which was not dangerous yet, but would be in 4 days. Command was informed. Command confirmed that replacement parts were 6 days out. The enemy, which had been pressing from the north ridge for 9 days, would reach the perimeter in 4. Groth reported this to the unit's commanding officer. The commanding officer looked at the numbers, confirmed they were correct, and began planning an orderly withdrawal. This was the logical response. The math was simple. They could not hold without the equipment. The equipment would not arrive in time. You leave. Then the human engineer attached to the unit, a man named Sol, said he would like a day to look at the problem before they finalized that decision. The commanding officer said he could have the day. Sol spent it going through the wreckage of a supply transport that had come down 2 weeks earlier, 300 meters outside the perimeter. He made 6 trips back and forth. He brought back pieces of things. Pieces of things that were not from the same equipment, not from the same species, not designed to connect to each other in any way that a manual would recognize. He also brought back what appeared to be a heating element from a food preparation unit. He worked through the night. Groth walked past the workshop 3 times during that night, and each time Sol was on the floor, surrounded by pieces, holding 2 components up to the light and looking at them the way a person looks at a problem that refuses to cooperate. In the morning, Sol had a device. It was not beautiful. It looked like something that had been built by someone in poor lighting with not enough time and components that had no business being near each other. It had 4 different types of fasteners. Some of it was held together with cable ties. It worked. The eastern defensive line came back online. The outpost held. The replacement parts arrived 6 days later, and a proper engineer looked at Sol's device for a long time before asking, very carefully, how it had been done. Sol explained his process. The other engineer said, "But these 2 components are not compatible." Sol said, "I found a way to make them not aware of that." Groth asked Sol later how he had known what to do. He expected a technical explanation, a specific knowledge of systems or engineering principles that had guided the decisions. What Sol said instead was this: "I didn't know. I just started with the parts one had and tried things until one of them worked. When something didn't work, I took it off the list. When the list got short enough, the answer was whatever was left." He said it simply, not as if it were impressive, as if it were obvious. Groth thought about that for a long time. Every trained engineer he knew worked forward from knowledge. You understand the system, you apply the correct solution, you solve the problem. This was how it was supposed to work. Sol had worked backward from the problem, removing wrong answers until a right one appeared, with no guarantee that a right answer existed at all. He had simply believed that if he kept removing wrong answers, something would eventually be left. And it had been. Groth did not know what to call that. It was not a technique. It was almost a faith, a belief that the problem could be solved, held firmly enough to make the solving possible. He looked at Darvek. "Learned or born with?" he said, coming back to the question. "Both, I think. They teach each other this way of thinking. They pass it between themselves from a young age. But they also seem to carry something inside them that believes, before there is any evidence, that there is an answer." He turned his cup. Other species wait for the answer to become visible before they commit to finding it. Humans commit first. Then they find it. Darvek considered this for a moment. Skiv said, "What if they commit and there is no answer?" Groth thought about Soul's heating element, holding two incompatible systems together in the dark. Then they build one, he said. The canteen worker had turned off half the lights. The cantina was entering that late-night state where the air gets thicker and conversations get slower and whatever is said starts to feel heavier than it would in daylight. Only a handful of soldiers remained. The three at the corner table had not moved for a long time. Skiv asked his question quietly, like he was not sure he was allowed to ask it. Are they actually afraid of anything? Groth did not answer immediately. The question did something to his face that the other two had not seen before. Not hesitation. Something closer to care. Like he was handling something that mattered and did not want to drop it. Yes, he said. They are. He was quiet for a moment. This story, his voice suggested, was different from the others. Waypoint 7 was a civilian transit station. It had not been built to be defended. It had been built to hold 600 people temporarily, the kind of station where families rested between longer journeys. When the war reached that sector, the station's systems went into lockdown, and a lot of people who had been passing through became people who were trapped. Groth's unit, together with 2 human squads, was part of the Liberation Force. The operation itself was not long. 3 hours. The enemy presence was light. What the soldiers were not prepared for, when they got inside, was what they found. There were children. Many of them. They were alive. Barely. Groth did not want to describe the conditions in detail. He said only that the children had been in that station for 19 days, and the station had not been built for long occupation, and the people who had been holding it had not been careful with resources. Anyone who served long enough in contested space could complete the picture without needing more words. There was a young human soldier in the Liberation Unit named Fun. He had performed well during the operation. Groth had noticed him. He was steady and disciplined, moved with purpose, communicated clearly. He was the kind of soldier you would point to if someone asked you what a good soldier looked like. When they secured the medical bay and began bringing in the children, Fun continued working. He helped carry. He followed instructions. He did what was needed. He was still steady. Then, when the last group had been brought in and the medical teams were moving, Fun walked to the outside wall, sat down against it, and stopped. He did not collapse. He did not make a loud sound. He put his back against the wall, drew his knees up, and shook. It was quiet, and it was steady, and it was completely outside his control, that shaking. His hands, his jaw, all of it. He stared at the floor and shook. Another human soldier, a large older man named Oren, saw it happen. Oren did not go get a medic. He did not report it. He did not say anything encouraging or give any of the speeches that soldiers sometimes give each other in hard moments. He walked to where Fun was sitting, lowered himself down to the floor beside him, and sat there. He did not speak. He did not put his arm around the younger soldier. He did not try to fix it. He just sat. Groth watched this from a distance, not wanting to intrude but not able to look away. He watched for 4 hours. Over those 4 hours, the shaking slowed. It did not stop all at once. It left the way cold leaves a room when heat returns, gradually, in stages, until at some point it was simply gone. Fun's breathing changed. Then his posture. He did not speak for most of it. Oren did not speak for most of it. At the end, Fun said something that Groth was too far away to hear. Oren responded. Then they both stood up, and Fun went back to work. He was first on the volunteer list for the next mission. Groth asked Oren about it later. He asked what had been said, those last words, after the 4 hours of silence. Oren thought about it. He said that Fun had said he was all right, and Oren had said he knew. That was all. Groth sat back. The table was very quiet. Skiv was not moving. Darvek was looking at his hands. They are afraid, Groth said. They are afraid of the same things you and I are afraid of. Pain, loss, failure, seeing things that cannot be unseen. He paused. They feel it exactly as we do. Maybe more, in some ways. They have very large feelings for small creatures. He let that sit for a moment. The difference is 2 things. They do not let the fear make the decision, and they do not make each other carry it alone. He looked at the corridor, then back at his recruits. Oren did nothing. He just stayed. And that was enough. That is how they do it. Neither recruit spoke for a long time. They seem, Darvek said finally, very tired. Groth nodded. Yes, he said. They are. They carry a great deal. And they keep going anyway. He picked up his cup. It was empty. One more, he said. Then you should sleep. The last drink sat in front of Groth, and he did not touch it right away. He looked at the two young soldiers across from him. Darvek, who had come to the table nervous and gone somewhere else entirely over the course of the evening. Skiv, who had stopped fidgeting at some point during the second story and not started again. It was late. The canteen worker had started wiping tables at the far end of the room. The sounds from the human barracks had gone quiet some time ago. The corridor was dark and still. Darvek asked the question that had been underneath all his other questions since the start. Should we be afraid of them? Groth looked at him. I was, he said. For a long time. He picked up his drink. He did not tell a story from a war this time. What he told them was the thing that had changed him. It was not a battle. That was the part that still surprised him when he thought about it. After everything he had seen in combat, in all the fights and campaigns and hard ground and bad odds, the thing that finally shifted him was a disaster response on a colony called Ferris Reach. The atmospheric processors on Ferris Reach were old and had been failing in small ways for 2 years. The colony administration had filed reports. The reports had been received. There were plans. There were committees. There were schedules for upgrades. All of these things were real and ongoing and had produced very little in the way of actual progress by the time the primary processor failed completely. What followed was fast. An atmosphere without proper processing becomes unbreathable in stages. The colony had roughly 18 hours before the air in the lower districts would become dangerous and fewer hours than that before it would begin killing the very old and the very young. There were 9,000 people on Ferris Reach. 6,000 of them were in the lower districts. Every Confederacy agency on the ground that day did the right things. They ran assessments. They contacted orbital resources. They organized evacuation routes. They calculated how many people could be moved in how many hours and compared it against the timeline of atmospheric degradation. They were professional and thorough, and they were saving people in an orderly, structured way. The human disaster response team arrived 4 hours in. They were 7 people. They looked at the situation for about 20 minutes. Then they stopped looking at it and started working. They did not wait for the assessment to conclude. They did not coordinate with every agency before acting. They asked 2 questions. Where are the people, and what is the fastest way to move them? Then they moved. They worked without stopping. Groth watched a woman named Doss carry a man on her back up a staircase that had lost its power for the 3rd time that day. He watched another member of the team go into a section of the facility that the atmospheric readings had already flagged as above safe exposure levels. The man had a breathing mask that was rated for that environment for approximately 40 minutes. He came back out in 38, with 2 people who could not walk on their own. Then he went back in. When the team leader, Doss, was asked later why her team had exceeded safe exposure limits and worked beyond the boundaries of their designated sectors, she said, there were still people in there. The Confederacy's organized response saved roughly 60% of the people on Ferris Reach that day. The math was solid. The outcome was as good as the situation allowed. The human team saved the other 40%. Groth had stood on the upper level and watched all of this happen and felt something change in the way he understood things. He had been afraid of humans because of what they were in war. That fear had made sense. War rewarded the things humans did well, and humans did those things without limitation, and that was frightening. What he had not understood was that it was not a war thing. It was just a them thing. The same endurance. The same refusal to stop. The same ability to decide that something was necessary and then simply do it, without waiting to feel ready or certain or safe. It came out in war because war asked for it. But it was always there. In the dark of a failing colony, in a damaged marsh, in a medical bay against a wall, in 11 hours on a broken flank. It was who they were. Groth finished his drink. He set the cup down. Should you be afraid of them? He turned the cup in his hands one time. Fear them if you want. That is a fair response to what they are. He set the cup flat on the table. But know this. There is no species in the galaxy I would rather have beside me. Not behind me. Beside me. Where they can see what needs doing and decide to do it. He stood up. His joints made the sound they always made. He picked up his coat from the back of the chair. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is long. He walked out. Darvek and Skiv sat still for a moment. Then, without either of them deciding to, they both looked toward the dark corridor where the human barracks were. Quiet. Still. Sleeping. They did not look frightening, sleeping. They looked like soldiers.